Now, the Pan-African Parliament returns to plenary this month after a one-year hiatus due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The fifth Parliament's opening session took place in Midrand this week, amid calls for the legislative body to be strengthened. Now, the Pan-African Parliament was launched in 2004 as the legislature for the African Union to promote democracy on the continent and to ensure integration between its 55 member states. In fact, the current sitting is expected to explore reinforcing its oversight and accountability roles as an organ of the African Union. But today, elections for a new leadership will take place. Let's unpack the various issues around this story now. We're joined by Pan-African Parliament Clerk Vipya Harawa via our video link this morning. Vipya, it's great to have you with us on the show this morning. A very good morning to you. I outlined it just briefly for the sake of our viewers who are tuning in this morning to know what the role of the Pan-African Parliament is. We know it's an organ of the African Union, but break it down for us.
That's right. The Pan-African Parliament is an organ of the African Union, one of the very original 7 or so organs. And our job is to facilitate integration of the continent through legislation, and by so doing ensure the full participation of all African people in the socio-economic development of the continent. Yes.
So one of the big issues that have come up over the past couple of days, particularly by the EFF leader Julius Malemas and Pan-African Parliament MP, by his utterances in Midrand over the past day or so, calls for the rotation of the presidency of the Pan-African Parliament. How does the presidency work as it stands?
Well, let me say that, yes, there have been calls to enforce rotation in the Pan-African Parliament, not just by Honorable Malema. There are also others, many other honorable members of the Pan-African Parliament who have tried to enforce that call. The rotation is a principle that is recognized by the African Union. It's been legislated upon within the African Union, the Executive Council decisions. There are also decisions within the Pan-African Parliament itself. And basically, it is a principle that recognizes equality in the participation of all members of the African Union and its organs in the leadership of those organs. So principle basically is that it's expected that leadership roles should rotate. No single country or region should monopolize the leadership of a particular organ of the African Union or the African Union itself.
You know, you at the start of our interview, Vipya, in terms of just explaining to us the role of the Pan-African Parliament, you said it's to facilitate integration through legislation. So how do we understand exactly what that means, given that there have also been calls through this fifth Parliament in Midrand to say that the Pan-African Parliament needs to be strengthened into an actual legislative authority?
The Pan-African Parliament started functioning in 2004. That's when it had its first session in March 2004. And at that time, it was given a 5-year mandate to act as a consultative body and as an advisory body to the African Union and its organs in preparation to full legislative mandate after the 5 years. So the expectation was after the 5 years, the Pan-African Parliament would then start making legislation. Now, what has transpired is that after the 5 years, the advisory and consultative role was extended. And so as I'm talking to you now in May 2021, the Pan-African Parliament has, over the past 19 years, still been exercising the role of being consultative and of being providing advice and being a watchdog of governance to the African Union and its organs.
Mm-hmm.
And the strengthening that is envisaged now is that it should graduate from that role of being consultative and advisory to a position where it actually now starts making laws that would bind the continent. So that is the strengthening that we are at the junction in the affairs of the Pan-African Parliament, and the general feeling is that we have laid the ground properly. We are now ready to dive from this springboard into the role of actually making law.
Mm. I mean, it's far beyond that 5-year deadline, isn't it? By your account, 2009 should have been when you were diving from that springboard.
14 years. This is 14 years later.
Mm.
The original plan was that we should have started making laws 14 years ago.
Mm.
That's the situation in terms of strengthening the Pan-African Parliament.
Yeah. I mean, what does that say? The fact that there's been this 4-year delay, what does that say about the functioning and the role of the Pan-African Parliament on the continent when the agenda is meant to be unity?
Oh, it's still the laying down of the foundation is a necessary precedent to formation of laws. Laws require consultation. Laws require research. Laws require judging the mood of the people to know what it is that needs to be legislated. Mm. So the 19 years have not been put to waste. There have been a necessary time for building up the foundations on which credible legislation for the continent would be built. So it's not stagnation. It's not lost years. There are years in which a lot has been gathered and laid down in preparation for formulation of laws.
Vipya,
yes.
what do you say to critics of organizations like the Pan-African Parliament and the AU more broadly in terms of making real changes on the African continent where the challenges are so vast and so different? So not just paying lip service to the agenda of the organization, but actually effecting real change.
Well, the challenges of the continent are many and diverse, and solutions aren't always easy to come by. And I think that every continent has its challenges, including our continent, the continent of Africa. Mm. I think that discussion is very much a part of building the consensus that often leads to resolution of these problems. The African Union, when it was formed in the year 2000, focused mainly on socio-economic development of the continent. And that is why we moved from being organization of African unity to the African Union. The emphasis was on economic development. And there is a role for states to play. There is a role for the African Union to play. And I think that both state and the union are playing this role, but it is not an easy role.
Yeah.
It is not.
I want to, Vipya, just ask you one last question as we wrap up our interview this morning. Of course, of all the issues around unity and rotating of the presidency, one of the other big issues to come out of the Pan-African continent was the issue of vaccine equality around the world. We now know from the WHO in Africa that 1% of all the vaccines that have been administered around the world have been administered on the African continent. That issue of self-reliance and a lack thereof, and how detrimental it is to the continent, what kind of work is the Pan-African Parliament doing to that end, specifically insofar as COVID-19 vaccine equity is concerned? All All right, it does appear, my apologies for that, it appears we've lost our connection to Vipya Harawa. He is the Pan-African Parliament's clerk. As we continue to unpack that story, we're told elections for new leadership today taking place in Midrand. In fact, 120 new members to be sworn in, new leadership elected as well.